Okay.
What did you do earlier?
Because I haven't yet today. Okay, so we already did number 1.
Yeah.
But we're going to do number 2 and 3. So number 2, it says squared. Squared means the exact same thing. So I always cross off the squared and then I rewrite it. Exact. Do not change the sign in the middle. Squared means the exact same thing. So we're going to distribute because we have 2 binomials being multiplied. So 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times negative 5i is negative 20i. Negative 5i times 4 is negative 20i. And negative 5i times negative 5i. Well, 2 negatives make, say, 25, and then I squared because they both had I. So the biggest thing that I've seen on the multiplying from yesterday's practice is messing up the signs, the minus and the plus, and forgetting to square this one. So then you combine these 3 when those are not all like terms. Another thing I've seen is these 2 negatives being combined and canceling each other. Do 2 negatives cancel each other? No. Okay, so those should not cancel each other. It has to be a positive and a negative to cancel. So if I take 20 and I take 20 more, I took 40. So it should be minus 40i. And then bring down my plus 25, and then I squared is negative 1. Well, what's 25 times negative 1? So this becomes negative 25. And what's 16 minus 25? Negative 9. Any questions with that one? Okay, example 3. Do y'all remember what we call this when they look exactly the same except one's a plus and one's a minus? It's called a conjugate. I think I spelled that right. Okay, it's your conjugate. And remember when we did conjugates with our radicals, that's when it canceled the radical. So what do you think is going to cancel in this one? What is it that's weird about this one? The I. So when we did this with radicals, it canceled the radicals. So let's see if it cancels our i's with imaginary numbers. So negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Negative 2 times negative 3i is positive 6i. 3i times negative 2 is negative 6i. And 3i times negative 3i, well, positive times a negative is a negative. 3 times 3 is 9, and then I times I is I squared. And what do we notice about the middle 2 terms? They cancel. 6i minus 6i, a positive and a negative that match, are a 0 pair, so they cancel each other. And we get 4 minus 9 times what? Negative 1. Because I squared is negative 1. And what's negative 9 times negative 1? Positive 9. What's 4 plus 9? 13. Super close. So that is our refresher from yesterday. Bless you. We multiplied yesterday, but that was just a little refresher. Okay, now we're going to talk about powers of I. So 2 things I want to remind you of. We know that I is the square root of negative 1. And because of that, we know that I squared equals negative 1. Okay, so those are our reminders. We talked about that yesterday. So because of all that, we know, well, I to the first power is just I. We learned the power of 1 is just itself. Well, I squared we learned is negative 1. We don't even need an I anymore. It's just negative 1. So here's where it starts to change, is when we get into the cubed and so on. So I'm going to show you mathematically, and then I'm going to show you the trick. And the trick is what you'll use, but I want you to understand why the trick works. Yes? So I'm going to explain mathematically, and then I'm going to show you the trick, and you can use the trick. Yes? So if we have 3 i's, that's I times I times I. Well, we know that I squared, that's 2 i's, equals negative 1. And I bring down the 1 I had left. Well, what's negative 1 times I? Just negative I. So there's your answer. Well, then if I have I to the 4th, well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 i's. Not quite, almost on the right track, though. I squared is negative 1. I squared is negative 1. And what's negative 1 times negative 1? Positive 1. So then if we get to the fifth power, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, don't we know that 4 i's equals positive 1? And then I bring down another I. Well, what's 1 times I? I. Didn't it just start over? So how many options were there? 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, positive I, positive 1, negative 1. So there's 4 options, and because of that, you only have 4 options. Because if we did it again with 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4 of them makes a positive 1, 2 of them makes a negative 1. What's 1 times negative 1? Negative 1. Isn't that the next one? Didn't it just keep going in the pattern? So it's going to just keep following the pattern. And that's why the bases make sense. When you run the bases, you just keep going at every time you're at bat, right? Okay, you don't go in a different pattern. You just keep going. So you could always count here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is 1. Well, that's what we had. 5, 6. 6 is negative 1. That's what we had. However, do you really want to count 343 times? No. Nobody wants to. But how many options are there? 4. So what we can do is we can take our exponent and divide by 4. Because there are 4 options. So 343 divided by 4, and we get 85.75. Now, this is not my answer because that's not one of my options, but 0.75, think of quarters. How many quarters is 0.75? 3 quarters. So third base, well, look, I even labeled it for you. So what's my answer? Negative I. So your answer options are 1, I, negative 1, and negative I. So if we do this next one, 260 divided by 4, what is my decimal? Well, if there is no decimal, what's your decimal? No, it's 65. So 260 divided by 4 is 65. If it doesn't have a decimal, what can you put behind it? That doesn't change anything. Can't you put 0? So this is just 1. So if it's a whole number, this is where it is. Okay, whole numbers. It's 0.0. It's the same thing. You can put a 0.0 and that doesn't change anything. Now negatives just mean it's on the wrong side of the fraction. So if we make it a fraction and move it, this ends up being 1 over I to the 10th power. Well, 10 divided by 4, what's my decimal place? 0.5, which is the same thing as 0.50, so what's my answer? Negative 1. So we get 1 over negative 1, which is just negative 1. So last one, again, we make it a fraction, move it to the bottom, 1 over I to the 104. So it's going to give us 1 over something. Well, 104 divided by 4 is just a whole number. And what's a whole number? 1. And 1 divided by 1 is 1. Now, one thing I do want to show you when you're done writing that down, look at number 9. We did negative decimals, negative exponents, but we didn't do one where it was already on the bottom. So if it's on the bottom and it's negative, can't I just move it to the top and it becomes positive? So it just becomes this. Don't overthink that. Okay? And what's 9 divided by 4? 9 divided by 4 is 2.25. And 0.25 is first base, so it's just I. So that's all you're doing. This is your best friend.